Courtney. I'm honored to be up here with these amazing leaders. You know, from my point of view, unfortunately, we really lack leadership from the top in our country to acknowledge these two threats and what needs to be done. Basically, the border should be a military issue. We have some of the best and brightest in our country running our military. We have capabilities that would be able to secure our border if we treated it like a serious defense issue, and we have not. The transnational criminal organizations have their tendrils into Mexico, they have their tendrils into these local governments, and they're killing Americans, and it is very clear how we can stop them, and a lack of leadership from both these last two administrations means that we're not doing it, first of all. And second of all, the other threat, I totally agree, both China and Russia are extremely involved in the politics of Central and South America. I was saying earlier, I was with the president of Colombia, with some friends who were very close to him, the former president of Colombia, El Duque, and the people they caught coming across their border, involved in political rallies, involved in helping the far left there, were people sponsored by Russia, sponsored by Cuba, the same people who helped shift Chile to the far left. These are not just like local parties. These are our adversaries, realizing they can cause trouble for us and for the world, and have crony governments that they can work with if they push these places to the far left. And we've lost confidence in ourselves because of former things we did in the 70s, 80s, 90s, where we no longer are involved down there nearly as much as we should be. And so we have these huge threats coming from our adversaries, breaking things in this part of the world.
Well, are they doing enough? I mean, is there enough coordination?
This has been I think a positive trend over the last several years, where it used to be that the companies that would run the cyber infrastructure for the most advanced technology companies, most advanced banks, and others would have almost no role in the U.S. government, and there'd be entirely different companies that were winning all of the contracts from the U.S. government. And it's kind of like, it's like the animals that would evolve on like the Galapagos Island. If you put them on the mainland, they would be slaughtered because so that's kind of how the government technology was for a long time. And fortunately, in the last few years, you are starting. And that's a little too glib. If you go back to the 1970s, 1980s, the NSA was way ahead of private industry. By the way, I mean, I grew up in an era where in computer science, where the NSA would do something, and then the academics would figure out like 20 years later why they were doing it. And so there were, I think if you go to the mid-century, there was the very best and brightest technology there. And I think what happened, perhaps really the big shift was in the 90s, is that you had so many trillions of wealth being created and so many new advances in technology that a lot of these things in the private world in certain areas did get to be way, way ahead, like much more so than they ever were in the past from our perspective. And I think it took a while for the culture in the government to realize that and to say, oh, wait a second, there is some stuff out there that these giant corporations are doing with people in Silicon Valley that is more advanced than us. And I think you've seen that realization in some areas, and you have seen them start to adopt more private things, which is a positive trend. I mean, first of all, I 100% agree. You need to be standing up to them and calling them out. China, from their point of view, is in a Cold War. I mean, you had Chinese and Russian troops marching with the Mexican troop parades, I live in Texas, right nearby our border recently. You have China, putting in the Huawei networks and spying on all of these countries. You have them buying up the ports. You have them influencing elections to try to push in socialist governments that they could be friends with and control. What we saw this last month with Iran is that when Israel was very clear with the backing of the U.S. that, if they were attacked from the north, they would consider an attack not from our friends Hezbollah in Lebanon, but from actually Iran itself, and they deterred them because the Iranian mullahs did not want to be assassinated. And I think you have to be very, very clear with China that if certain things happen that you're doing right now in Central America and it's hitting us, or if you're supplying these things that are coming into the U.S., there's going to be an aggressive response in return. And until we have the leadership to say we're going to actually call you out and respond, they're going to keep hitting us through their proxies, and they're going to keep doing what they're doing. Because then because if we literally adopted and saw everything going on and secured it, then you would cut off the illegal immigration. And there's a lot of politicians in this country that do not want to cut off the illegal immigration. So it's a political choice, not a policy choice. We pretend it's a technology thing. We pretend it's a capability thing, but it's not. It's very cheap. It's very easy to see exactly what's going on the whole border. It's not expensive at all relative to our spend. It's a tiny percentage of the spend. And right now, let's be honest. We know there's evidence. There's a ton of our border guards and border patrol being bribed. There's a ton of sheriffs on the border being bribed. There's ranchers who, when they speak up what's going on nearby, get assassinated. There's crazy murderers in our country with the cartels that are randomly killing people because you're bringing these people in to help the cartels. I think it's a crisis. I think it's terrible. As a Texan in Texas, we're furious about this. We put up blockades, and they come in and they cut the blockades to let the immigrants in. So I mean, it's a very clearly a political choice being made to allow these people into our country.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm actually quite honored to be here. Before I get to that, I've always been interested, partly because I've had to be, about the difference between IQ and wisdom. And in Silicon Valley, we have historically had the smartest people in the world, but most people don't have the sense God gave a goat. And the American people are also among the smartest people in the world, but we have a wisdom advantage. So when I see that, what I really see is Americans are intuiting that if you want to hurt China and Iran, you better be able to be stronger than China, because it's the dominant economic force in the world. And it is actually different because you're competing against an adversary with peer-like economy, peer, or in some cases better engineering, and advantages and disadvantages in how they run their country. On the AI front, the misperception that most Americans have comes from something that is, it's this weird thing when you're the best in the world at something, like America is. America is by far the best in the world at entertainment, music, and software. It's so dominant in software that our B League, we have 5 products, any one of those products would be the most important, most valuable startup in Germany, by far. The most important question any VC asks before they invest is, where's your company? And if it's not here, you're gonna have a hard time. I was talking to someone who was saying off the record, and I've heard this many times, that Z says openly, we're behind in AI, and that's because they are. And we underestimate, partly because a lot of the AI innovation goes into domestic commercial companies, and that's a separate issue. How do you get that advantage into the most important part of our economy, which is defense, or I would like to call offense, against our adversaries? I don't know why we have to wait to be attacked, but we don't do that at Palantir.
Okay.
We don't wait to be attacked. But the reason for the misperception is when you are just naturally good at something, you assume that somebody who's naturally good at things we're not, like in general, there's good or better at hardware. They have a system we wouldn't want to live in, but it appears to work. And so that's just wrong. The issue for us is, how do we make sure the advantage we have gets to the most important people, and those people are in this room? And that is the issue we have. The issue they have is they're behind. And they know it. And they have an advantage because they know it, and we have a disadvantage because we may not know it.
Why we should be doing the things we're doing.
The only thing I would say, is like, the polls are very good, but we in corporate America, we who are running publicly traded companies, are an abysmal failure at standing up to people who are anti-American, who are breathing the vapors of a thin new religion at elite schools, who actually believe it would be better to have the world run by China than by America, and we're silent. As far as I can tell, there are only 3 companies that have been publicly pro-Israel on October 7th. There's Booz Allen, sometimes we disagree with him, there's Anduril, and there's Palantir. 3 companies. We have to do better. And that's not a problem with the politicians. Of course the politicians don't do enough, with notable exceptions. But it's, we have, like, somehow the corporate elite of this country thinks when it's time to make money, you stand up. And when it's time to stand up, you go play golf. And like, we got to change that. That's our fault. That's no one else's fault. I think when you look at those numbers, you see a world historic, awesome, and truly humbling country with a problem that's not showing up there. If you looked at the numbers, it would be that disagree with this. Actually, it would be, if you did this poll at Harvard, you'd see very different results. And that's the problem we have to actually deal with, because those are the future leaders, and we want people in 20 years sitting here with a basic understanding of decency. What those numbers say is Americans are decent people and are differentiated from any large society we've seen in the history of humanity. Those are those numbers. The problem is we're losing on the people that we're losing on are disproportionately the future, and we have to confront that as leaders and explain to people and be willing. A lot of people won't work at Palantir, but unfortunately for our adversaries, many of the best people in the world only want to work at a company like Palantir. Now on Ukraine, on October 8th, I ended up talking with very senior Israelis, and I begged them, I said, the one mistake you cannot make is the mistake I believe. I support, obviously, defending Ukraine, and I see it as like jailhouse rules. You let Russia come into our cell, it won't be the last time. So, and this is what we do not teach at our elite institutions. It's not like, oh, hey, we switch papers. But you have to show Americans in a visual way the savagery of our adversaries. Americans, as these numbers show, are way too decent to ever imagine what Hamas would do. Almost no American can imagine what Hamas did. Very few Americans can imagine what Russia does and why. You have to show them, and we have to have a more direct dialogue with people that's visual and passionate, and where you say, yeah, you're just completely full of that, like you have to have that dialogue. We do not bring that dialogue, and of course the American people wander off, because if they don't believe you believe, really believe, and you're not showing them the actual facts, they have other priorities, and they do see a looming China, which really scares them. And so, I think there's a lot of room to improve these things, but I think that's the mistake that was made.
Trying to build allies around the world so they build an economic strength, not just China's economic strength, but partners that can counter U.S. influence. We are not winning that argument to the degree that we should. In this room, we're all right, we're all like, but the rest of the room, it's like if we told the rest of the world, hey, the reason we're in Ukraine is because we want to make more tanks to shoot people, yeah. I think there would be a little bit of a problem.
Look, I'm a huge admirer of your work. I think that's not a great argument. And I think if you made that argument in these districts, what they would say is, yeah, I'm standing against my interests because I believe your argument is morally wrong. We have the moral high ground. We should not cede it by saying we're making money. Of course
You can make both. You can make both.
Well, we shouldn't cede it by saying that the reason we're doing this is we want to make more tanks.
You have to win the argument. You have to win the argument with people who disagree with us. Everyone here. If you make that argument in Europe or in Harvard University, people are like, okay, great, so you're saying we're going to... One of the key lessons of Silicon Valley dominates the world in the most important area, which is technology and primarily software, now AI. We make moral arguments, we build our companies around those moral arguments, unless we're consumer internet, in which case we're mostly lying, but, and then we make a lot of money. And what I don't like about that argument is, it's like, yeah, we're making money.
I didn't say we're making money. We are creating jobs. We are creating hot production lines for the concerns. I mean, when you look at the polls, people are worried about China. This is helping us to prepare to defend against China. This is our effort in Ukraine is actually making it less likely that China will invade Taiwan.
The argument is...
You have to make it from a national interest.
There's true and persuasive. You're making a true argument that's not persuasive to people I would talk to.
Make it about deterrence and defense.
If you make the argument to the American people, which we all support, that by winning in Ukraine, we are not only going to hurt Russia, we're going to hurt China, but we're going to do it in a way where we learn lessons that give us military and economic superiority over China, you will see Americans follow it. But the argument that is being made now is we do not show people, either in Israel or in Ukraine, what's actually happening on the battlefield. Then we make this kind of argument, when instead we should be saying, we have the moral superiority, and the way the Ukrainians won on the battlefield, we are going to learn those lessons, we are going to import them to America, and we are going to scare the bejeebers out of China. That's an argument Americans will follow. I don't see people making that in my industry enough, and you have to link them. And again, we have an industry that has been the best in the world at doing this. We should just copy what it does and make those arguments, and I think we will do. But again, these are really strong numbers. Now, I know we in this room believe we have a political problem because, Trump is doing well, but in reality, we have a great country, and maybe we will just do very well to listen to the American people.
How much and how significant is it that number could dip if questions about the legitimacy about how Israel is executing its war continue to balloon?
You're asking me?
Sure. I'd like you all to weigh in on that.
It's very hard to see the future. I think first of all, there were unfortunately way too many people on October 7th who were happy. And we have to acknowledge we have a huge problem in the Western world with anti-Semitism. And we cannot, not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, but a larger portion of it is than we realized. And we have to call it out. And I'm one of the largest donors to the Democratic Party, and quite frankly, I'm calling it out and I'm giving to Republicans. If you keep up with this behavior, I'm going to change. A lot of people like me are going to change. We have to really call this out. It is completely beyond the bounds. That's before you get to the Israel thing. Most Americans, again, most Americans who are not at elite institutions, see this battle for what it is. You see a one side which is powered by terrorism, that is using terrorist means, and that will expand its footprint to the West if it's not pushed back. And I am not a legislator, but I am running one of the coolest companies in the world, and I'm telling young people, you are breathing the vapors of a dangerous, new, fake, and self-destructive religion when you are sitting at your elite school pretending because you watched TikTok twice and got an A+ on some crazy paper because your professor couldn't get a job anywhere else, that you actually understand the world. And you're not welcome at my company.
Yeah.
Sensitivities, but in Ukraine, how is it being used?
Well, if you want to select just a simple thing, I want to find object the size of a Coke bottle in a desert the size of Texas, and I need to do it quickly, that is a problem that you will need algorithms, what lay people call AI, to do. And without that, you're going to spend thousands of human hours, and your adversary, if your adversary has as many humans, and those humans are willing to work around the clock, i.e. your adversary is China, you're going to lose. So AI really has two components for American security. The most important that is going to happen, no matter what anyone does in this room, is the American economy is going to outperform every economy in the West. We have a business in Europe. In Europe, it's like 10 years ago, and you can't talk to them about what it means to implement things where you are essentially augmenting the value of a human or replacing a human. In this country, every single company in America wants a way of making their margins better, their systems work better, their workers more efficient. They want to bring manufacturing from Japan and manufacture like you were in Japan with American workers. And this is going to completely transform our GDP relative to other countries, and hopefully that will be used to power the critical work. In the US government, if you asked a different question, you asked Americans, define AI as a piece of software that actually works. Okay, let's just call it that. Whether it's algorithms, large language models, it's something that works as a product. And you asked Americans, what percentage of the DoD or anything is being spent on that? You'd probably get an answer like 20%, 30%. It's under 1%. We really have to change how we spend on these things. We are ahead of China, but we cannot beat China when they're going to spend 20, 30% of their total budget, and we're arguably spending, no matter how you count the numbers, 1%. And so, and where does it help? It helps. One of the things that's really cool about AI broadly defined is it accelerates things that are working into a different level. So if your tank works, you can make it better. Your supply chain that's broken can be made to work. Your plane can be guided. By the way, you talk about the industrial base. Yes, we don't have enough munitions, but if you use software, you can get a 10x efficiency ratio on those. So you need 1/10. You need less money, and it goes a lot further. And then I don't want to make this all about talking to the American people. The American people intuitively are wise. The American people look out and say, our software companies are the best in the world. I wonder what they're doing on defense. And like, you want to connect with the American people, you've got to connect to things they see, they use. And that actually will change how the American people will support these things.
Countries that we're berating to spend
Just to
more
this
money.
point, if you look at like the rough numbers, if you look at market cap of American companies, say compared to European or any other companies, we're back to like the 60s where America is just dominant. So in contradiction to what I said before, I think first of all I should make the economic argument, which is like we are winning. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse for our NATO allies because of they're making terrible investments in tech. I say this as I have screamed at people in Europe where that's not going to change. And it's so bad that, and this is a bad idea, it's not practical, but we'd be better off having, at least when it comes to AI, enhanced weaponry, if they paid less but absorbed some of our costs. Because like What really a lot of these programs are doing, if we're being honest, is just taking 2% and spending on their local industry, which in the hardware context might be a good idea, but if you have a software industry you're killing by creating protection and keeping companies like mine out, you have no future in the area that's the most important thing. And so I would be a little more gentle on this because we're winning, but I would be a little harder on what does your AI-enhanced weapon system actually welfare, or is this real? And like force real accounting, because 1% on something that's real is a lot better than this 2% fake, it's fake, we get to say we did it kind of thing. That doesn't serve anyone, and yeah.